I'm sure it's afternoon where some of you guys are at, but it's good to see all of you. I'm glad you guys took the time to log on, and want to thank Megan and the MHTTC for inviting me on again. It's always a pleasure to come on and share some information and knowledge and learn from each other. So let's see. I need to share my screen, Megan,
Yep.
but it's saying it's not
Oh, I
disabled.
didn't let you, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
So we'll get started here in just a second. We're until 12, right? Or until 1 your
Yep,
time.
we have an
Hour.
hour.
Okay.
Okay.
So this topic, what we're going to be talking about today is just stigma and labels, and this is a huge one. I think whenever we're talking about, I work a lot with addiction and mental health, but really any type of issues that we're facing in our communities and just everything that we face. I think stigma and labels play a role in it. So it's an important topic. It was really hard to figure out how to do this in an hour. So I kind of made a brief presentation, and this is really, I think the purpose of my presentation today is really just to bring awareness. So it was really hard to kind of get in depth and figure out how we're going to I wasn't quite sure how to approach this one because, like I said, it's just you'd spend probably a half a day just talking about just the beginning of it. But the title of this presentation is The Importance of Reducing Stigma and Labels in Our Community. And like Megan said, my name is Jason Butler. I'm a member of the Ute Tribe from the UN ORA Agency in Fort Shane, Utah. I have a BA in psychology from Idaho State University. I have my master's in family and human development from Arizona State University, and I'm currently employed with the Shoshone Bannock Tribes here in Fort Hall, Idaho, as the behavioral health manager. Um, so those are kind of like my academic credentials, my job stuff. But more importantly, I have lived experience. So I have experience with addiction, positive change, and just everything that comes, I think, with being a Native American male and all that that entails. So, I tend to, the work that I do, a lot of times I'm identifying with individuals that are coming in to seek service. So, although I do have an educational background, I always tell people I got a doctorate in being a Native man. So, it's just a lot of us grow up in ways that aren't always ideal. So I've done quite a few presentations on different topics, and I always like to start with just a brief introduction of some of the issues that we face, and because it really tells the story of why we're here and why we're talking about the things that we're talking about. So those of you that have seen me present have probably seen these first three slides before. And I know a lot of you guys that work in the field of behavioral health or any helping profession are probably aware of a lot of these things, but I just always like to kind of refresh, and it just helps us to figure out why we're here. But I'll go through these fairly quickly. And this one is just getting to the root of some of the issues that we have in Indian country. And when we look around, regardless of, I think, the community that you belong to or the reservation that you live on, or even if you're serving urban Indian populations, a lot of the issues that we face are universal. So these aren't, specific to one tribe or one community. These are things that you tend to find just about in every Native community in the country. And those things include poverty and unemployment, some domestic violence issues and sexual abuse, alcohol and drug use, suicide, poor health conditions. And, the poor health conditions are not just, I think, specific to when we think of health, we think of physical health. But this encompasses physical health, mental health, emotional health, and I think more importantly for Native people is spiritual health, something that often we don't, really include when we talk about the health and well-being of individuals. But to Native people, I think the spiritual health component is really at the core of everything that we see in our communities. Um, when we talk about some of the physical issues that we have, or mental health issues, addiction issues, a lot of those can be brought back to, I think, the spiritual realm of things and how our spiritual well-being is. So that's an important thing to always mention. And then just increased death rate. I think a lot of times that's the result of some of the things that I just mentioned. And then a loss of culture too plays a big role when we talk about identity and just trying to figure out where we fit in this world, and that brings us to, just the assimilation into Western society. We live in a world today where we have to deal with, I think, living in a society where opposing ideology is at, every turn, whether it's religion, capitalism, individualism versus collectivism, our connection to our Mother Earth, our family structure, our overall way of life is just completely different. So, I mean, you can take a look at a lot of those things, and I always like to use family structure as a big one, and this plays a role, I think, in some of the issues that we saw, but also how we deal with things, I think, from a professional standpoint. Because a lot of times when you are working, say, in an outside agency, and for example, in a big city, you're going to be dealing with individuals that live in that city, but you probably don't know them. You probably don't know their families. You don't know who they are, but they come in for services and then they leave, and you don't see them again until they come back. Whereas within our communities, things are a lot different, because a lot of times our family structures are built in such a way that a lot of times you could almost be related to, half of the reservation sometimes, whether it be by blood or by extended family or by marriage. So we live in such small communities that, it's really hard to get around some of those things. And, family structure is a big one. But I think another big one, when you talk about like capitalism and individualism and things like that, that really are at the core of American society, that's just not something it's not our way of life. We come from a people of collectivism, and having roles within our community and being a part of the community, so that everyone has a role to play, but also, everyone, no one ever goes without, you know. Whereas when you look at American society, it's every man for himself, right? Like, you get what you can at all costs. That's different in our communities, where it's always that idea of helping. But, as we move forward in time, some of those things have kind of become blended. So we've kind of adopted some of those things, but also I think we struggle within that. Although we have to live within it, a lot of times we struggle because naturally we are, I think, our thoughts, but also within us, it doesn't jive with, I think, what's happening. So we end up with that struggle to adapt. One of the other things I like to mention is just historical trauma, and I'll do just a brief overview on this, but, the forced assimilation. So a lot of the things that I just mentioned, where we're kind of forced into this society and have to figure out how to navigate through it and live within it. But there's also some of the deeper issues when we talk about the genocide of our people. Some of the things that happen as people moved into the country and started to take over, and really tried to wipe our people out. Part of a result of not being able to do that was having to relocate us. So a lot of us live on reservations now, which is a direct result of that relocation. Boarding schools was a big part of that. I think the trying to assimilate our people. And that's a huge one, because, a lot of times people don't realize how recent a lot of that was. My grandparents, my great grandparents who were alive when I was, I was fortunate enough to know them. They went through all of these things, and they had stories of these things. So, a lot of times people think this happened a long time ago, but it really wasn't all that long ago. So when we look at the things that they went through and the result of that on them, a lot of those things get passed on to us through our parents, and then through us, and now to our children and to our grandchildren. Um, just poor overall living conditions and struggle adapting, like I mentioned, results in a lot of these things that I mentioned on the previous slide, of alcohol and drug use and domestic violence, sexual abuse, poverty, unemployment, suicide. impacts to overall health and outcomes and disease and death. So, just a brief overview on those things. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I do like to mention it because a lot of times when we talk about many of the issues that these presentations are based on, sometimes we want to get to the root of the issue, and it all stems back to these things. I think the struggle to adapt and a lot of the things that our people have been through. So that kind of brings us to the reason why we're here, which is stigma and labels. So I think the first thing I wanted to do is really just define it, and the Oxford Dictionary defines them as, stigma is defined as a mark or disgrace with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. And then label, a classifying phrase or name applied to a person or thing, especially one that is inaccurate or restrictive. And when you think about it, you think about, like, especially with labels, like, I think it's pretty much ingrained in our society that every single thing has to be labeled, right? Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's an object or a person, we have to have a label for everything, and that's pretty important when we start talking about, I think, some of the issues that we face. So, one of the things that we want to talk about is what role does stigma and labels play in our community, and that's really why we're here. Looks like we have a hand up. So, Sarah?
I just wanted you to know that there's no slides being shown. And there was a comment earlier, but I don't think you saw it. So I wanted to raise my hand, let you know that we're not, thank you.
You see now? Okay. I was switching them on my I was
okay.
switching them on my screen. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
I was switching them on the wrong screen. Yeah, like dual screens nowadays. So I figured it all out, how to get it set up right. Because when I did my very first one, I did it right. And I was I had you guys on this screen, and then I had my presentation here, and I was doing my presentation like this. And then people were like, why is he looking over there? So I figured it out, but now I got to remember to switch the slide.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for letting me know. So that's a good place, though. If you guys have any questions or any comments or anything, whether it's like a technical thing or if you just have a question about something that we're discussing, feel free to raise your hand, and just we'll address that as we go. So, but one of the things we want to talk about is, what role do these things play in our community? One of the things that I found is, a good question to ask is, do we participate in the stigmatization and labeling of our fellow tribal members, our community members, our family members, and our friends? And like I said, this goes back to, I think, just our overall society and this thing that we have to label every single thing. Like, think about it in your life. Everything that we encounter, everything that we have in our lives, whether it's in our house, in our office, everything has a label, right? So naturally, when things come into our life, or when we see something or when we see someone, it's like an automatic reaction to label those things, right? Some of those can be positive, some of them not so positive, and even kind of moving into the realm of the negative. But I just want you guys to think about that. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, I had a really hard time trying to figure out how to tackle this subject in an hour. And I decided that probably the best thing that we can do is really just bring awareness to the issue, and then bring awareness to how that fits within our own personal lives. Because as we're going to find, as we try to find solutions to this problem, it's all going to start right here. It's going to start with us and how we think, how we are able to reframe our minds, and then ultimately kind of change our behaviors. So one of the things that I want you guys to do is think about that question. Do we participate in stigmatization and labeling of our fellow tribal members, our community members, our family members, and our friends? So, think about that just for a second. And as we go through, continue to kind of keep that in your mind. But, and also in the professional setting, do we participate in the stigmatization and labeling of individuals seeking services, right? And that's a really important thing, because you kind of see that change as we go along, but you start to realize the importance of language and the language that we use. So I'm sure a lot of you guys, if you're working in behavioral health centers or mental health facilities, treatment centers. You're probably calling individuals clients or patients, or, I know we call them recoveries, different labels that are put on people, right? And you think about like the process that they're engaged in, right? So a good example for, say, individuals that are suffering from alcohol and substance use disorder, a lot of times you say they're in recovery, right? Um, so now we've labeled what it is that they're doing, right? We're in recovery, and I personally, I never really liked that term. So, like, I never labeled myself as an individual in recovery. I just always said I'm seeking positive change. I'm making positive change in my life. That's what I'm doing. So, like, for me personally, I've never used the word recovery. Same with like alcoholism. Like, you have people that AA is a good example. Like, hi, my name is Jason Butler. I'm an alcoholic, and I have never called myself that ever. I always tell people I was a person that used to drink a lot. At some point, I liked it, and then I didn't like it, and I quit. You know, so I never agreed with calling myself an alcoholic. But like, you could get into debates with people, especially like I said, with people that engage in AA, of like, no, you are an alcoholic and you have to call yourself that because you're always going to be that. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not. Like I said, I used to drink and I did it a lot and it almost ruined my life, and I stopped and I don't do it anymore. Now I'm engaged in positive change. So, like, no, you're in recovery. And it's like we get in these arguments again about labels, right? Um, and I think the important part of that, like when you get into that, one of the things that you want to remember is like, I think what we label people is less important as to how it makes people feel, right? So, like, I always tell people, like, if you're comfortable labeling yourself as an alcoholic and that's how you want to, like, I guess, introduce yourself, you're welcome to do that, and I respect that. But if someone else doesn't feel that way, I don't think they should have to do that. Um, so again, like, going back to whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, just think about, like, are we doing that? And that goes, the next one says, are we creating an environment that is supportive of growth and change? Right? So if by labeling and using the example that I use, if we're going to get into these debates about what I am or what I'm not, is that creating an environment that's helpful to me getting where I want to go? Right? And I think that's the most important thing. So sometimes, again, it's like this societal ideology that we get stuck thinking that we have to make sure that we label every single thing, and that every single person or thing has to fit into one of those labels, right? But what is the purpose of that? You know, um, and if we do that, are we creating an environment that's supportive of growth and change, right? So if I'm not comfortable calling myself that, but someone is forcing me to do it in order to get where I want to go, like, is that going to benefit that process? Usually the answer is probably not. So one of the things that we think about then is like, what is the impact of that? We think of the impacts of those things. So if we're deciding that, yes, we are going to label things and people do have to fit into those labels, what is the impact of that on people? One of the things that I like to use to highlight this, and we're going to do an activity right now. So one of the things I want you guys to do, and I'm not switching it on the other one again. So what I want you guys to do is, in the chat box, please put as many words or short phrases that describe people with alcohol addiction, drug addiction, and mental health. And these are things that you hear all your life. So I know, like, when I was growing up, I had a lot of uncles that were alcoholics. And I mean, like, heavy alcoholics. And that's a label right there, right? They're alcoholics. And they were the type of people that would sit in front of the store all day and just drink. But they were alcoholics. Some people called them alkies. I've had a lot of people that were addicted to drugs in my life, and people call them junkies, right? I've had people that have had mental health issues in my life. Sometimes people call them psychos or crazies, right? So think about those terms that maybe you've heard throughout your life, and just put them in the chat box. So just as we're going, we'll take like 2 minutes and just type as many as you can. Just type them in there. Just whatever pops into your head. Just throw them in the chat box.
Can you see these, Jason?
Yep. Yeah, I'm reading them as they come in.
Okay.
Alrighty. So I think we're good there. It's quite a few. So I'm gonna go back to the top here and just read some of them. So let me get, and there's quite a few. So let's see. I'm just gonna start reading them as soon as I get to the top. So we got drunk, crazy, addict, loser, user, drunks, junkie, drunk, addict, tweaker, addicts, crackhead, crazy, meth head, barfly, alcoholics, drunks, violent, addicts, crazy, Bums, Frank Gallagher, Drunk Town USA, Person with Problems, Drunk Indians, Town Drunks, Clients, Consumers, Nut Jobs, Hot Mess, Damn Drunks, Rugged Indians, Tweaker, Meth Head, Crackhead, Worthless, Mentally Ill, Crazy, Drunk, Psychotic, Loser, Jerk, Insane, Lost, Black Sheep, Idiot, Nuts, Problem Person, Lush, Druggy, Tect, Special, Druggies, Wife Beater, Junkie, Crackhead, Crazy, Lost Cause, Tweaker, Baracho, Junkies, Crackhead, Tweaker, Drunk, Wino, Drunk Indian, Junkie, Psycho, Loser, Crazy, Wino, Alky, Don't Trust Them, They'll Steal From You and Hurt You, Nuts, Gutter Rats, Junkie, Waste of Space, Useless, Addict, Person with Substance Use Disorder, Drughead, Worthless, Drunkard, Crackheads, Sick, Bum, Crazo, Wino, Lush, Crazy, Bipolar, Psycho, Crazy B Word, F'd Up. So that was like 2 minutes, right? We were able to come up with all those names, and I think one of them said the list goes on. So like if we were to sit here, I'm guessing that we could probably sit here for an hour, right? And just come up with name after name after name. And I think the important thing about that, when I read those out loud for all of us to hear, but one of the things that I want you to do now is think about when you look at the list, or in this case, when you heard the list, how did it make you feel? So now what I want to do is sit here in silence for 1 minute. We'll take 1 minute, and I want you guys just to close your eyes and think about all those words that I just said. And what does that make you feel? Right? So we'll just sit here and we'll sit here with our feelings about the list that we just heard. Okay. So now, if anyone wants to share, you can kind of unmute, or if you want to type it in the chat box. Kind of just a brief summary of how that made you feel. And there's a few in here already. It says terrible, sad, it was hard to hear, very sad, ashamed, worthless, hurt, hopeless. If anyone wants to unmute though and kind of share what that made you feel, feel free to do that.
With such a void of hope in any of those words, it just feels absolutely hopeless, which is the opposite of opportunity and healing, which is really what we would strive to do in mental health. But if in the back of your mind, that's what you're thinking about a person in front of you, how can you help them, really?
Yeah, good comment. Bobby has her hand up.
Yeah, it made me feel really sad for not myself right now, but like the person that I was 12 years ago. Like it made me feel really sad for that person because I remember how horrible that used to make me feel because I already felt like that myself. I felt all these things about myself, and then for people to say those things to me just, reminded me more that I didn't need to be. But like, it also makes me feel proud because all those people that called me that said I would never be wearing it now. And to be able to look back at those people and think, yeah, you were wrong, that makes me feel good. But the pain that person went through, every person that gets called that goes through, is just something no one should ever have to deal with. People are dealing with a lot. If someone's using drugs, if someone's any addiction, like mental illness, people are dealing with, everyone's dealing with a lot already. They don't need the labels. The labels don't help.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. That's a really good insight. And Jim, we'll take one more.
I just wanted to say that exercises like this make me really, really aware and conscious of just how ingrained this kind of thing is in myself and in our communities. And by that, I mean, there seems to be a kind of a need, and it goes back to colonial times of having to label and name everyone and strip people of their identities and give them new ones. Lakota have a word, I think, that means the name callers. And it happened in everything from, in my own people, I am from the Seneca Cayuga Nation of Oklahoma, but in actuality, there is no such thing as that. It is a name that was given to us by the federal government. And so this becomes just almost like a way of thinking. And, I'm looking at ways, I don't even like to use the word decolonize anymore because it's really, you can't decolonize something that's inherently colonized. And I'm even talking about our native RAND behavioral health programs and what have you. I think that the term I like to use nowadays is called indigenize and bring a different way of thinking and being into them. And what I do is really simple. And I heard you say it in the past, Jason, is to bring this into our work is just to be kind and treat other people as human beings. So thanks for this exercise.
Yeah, thank you for the comments, Jim. And we have one more, just as having a loved one and going through struggles myself, those words and labels made myself feel so many negative emotions and reminders of the judgments and labels that prohibit true healing and progress. So, that's kind of what we're getting at. And one of the things that when I very first did this exercise years ago, we were in a huge group and it was in person, and it was fun. We were having a good time coming up with all these names and laughing and having a good time. And then once we realized what we had done, it felt really crappy because I was like, man, and you just don't realize that these words that we use and the labels that we have, they've just become so ingrained. There's just like a natural thing, and we don't think of the actual impact that the language that we use or the terms that we use, the thoughts that are behind those, or what can be perceived from those things by the people that those labels are being used on, the impact that those have. So, it's really important. And I wanted to do this because, again, like I was thinking the most important thing of this presentation, because we have such a short time, is really just to bring awareness, I think, to ourselves and how often we do that. Um, and when I think about it, you imagine what individuals trying to overcome their past struggles and mistakes feel. So some of you guys kind of got at this as you were thinking, and in the comments, and then through the comments that you made here. But think about the individuals that are actually going through these struggles or trying to overcome these struggles. They probably spend a lot of time with these feelings already. And I think someone mentioned this, like, people are already feeling this. They don't need people to like further that thing by labeling them these things, because they're already, it causes insecurity. They're already in that space of feeling insecure about these things. And because of that, it may deter people from seeking help. It may cause isolation. So, I mean, if you have people that are feeling that and everywhere they go, like one of the things that I noticed too, when we came up with these lists, when I very first did it, I was like, man, that's what people think of me. At one time in my life, that's what people thought of me. And even today, because there's people that don't know the changes that I've made in my life, when they see me, they probably still think of me like that. Or that thought still goes through their head. And I know a lot of people see what I do now, and they're like, oh, what? He's the behavioral health manager? No, I know who he is. I know what he's done. So like that's still being, perpetrated today. I'm in a place personally where I'm okay with that, because I've done the work for myself to be okay with all the things that I've done. But when you have people that are in the beginning stages of change, think about where they're at and think about like the huge impact that it can have on them. Whether it's deterring them from seeking help or causing them to isolate, it could also cause them to fall back into old patterns of behavior. So it can cause relapse. It can cause, when we're talking about mental health issues, people that maybe don't want to go pick up their prescriptions or stop taking their medications. Maybe they don't want to come back into the treatment center, the mental health facility, because they don't want to be seen there, even though they know that they need counseling. They don't want to be seen at these places because they have this stigma attached to them within our own community, right? And that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes. It's our own communities and our own people, sometimes ourselves, that are kind of doing these things, and we can see that in kind of some of these activities that we do. But we can also cause individuals to give up completely. So I mean, you can have individuals, whether they've started treatment or recovery or whatever you want to call it, maybe they're so far along and they have these setbacks, and because they're being labeled and judged all the time, they just decide, you know what, this isn't worth it, because I'm putting myself through all of these things, and people are judging me, and that's a huge one. I think when you look at that, like one of the things I always think about is like when we're trying to help people or when we're trying to do something, like we don't have to point out the mistakes that they've made, right? People are well aware of that, and sometimes we fail to realize that yes, people know that they're being labeled these things. If they've made a mistake as a result of that, they're usually well aware of that, and they don't need people to remind them over and over again of either the things that they've done or who they were. Let's talk about what they want to become. Let's talk about the goals that they've set for themselves and figure out how we can help them to overcome those and then achieve those goals. Not constantly revisiting and labeling, because people are usually well aware of those things. So, that's an important point to make. And I think, just bringing awareness to these things. We talk about, finding solutions a lot of times. And this is kind of where I got hung up, because I was like, man, this is this is a lot longer than an hour. But, what I really wanted to do was really just bring awareness to the issue of what we have. And I think the best way to do that is always through self-awareness, So, at the beginning, I told you guys, just start to become aware. Are you doing this? Are you using these terms? Because I know, like I said, going back to the activity that we did, I know when I first very did the activity, I was actually like actively using some of those terms too. And I didn't realize I was doing that, you know. And once I realized it, I was like, whoa, I'm actually doing this more often than I thought I was, you know. And it kind of made me feel bad. One of the things I realized is like I wasn't intentionally trying to be hurtful to people. It was just, again, something that had been ingrained in me. And those were the terms that I learned growing up. So, like, you know, they were just things that I'd been accustomed to and learned. I just had to unlearn them and realize that that wasn't the correct way to do things. But I think, you know, the very first step in all of that was becoming self-aware. So, you know, I'd encourage all of you, you know, as you leave here today and as you go through your daily life, think about it. Are you using these terms? And, you know, again, in your personal life, in your professional life, are you doing these things? And what are areas that you can change some of those things? Because the individual change in behavior, that's where everything begins, especially when it comes to this, because, you know, we often are looking outward to find the solutions. If we do this, this is the huge question: are we participating in stigma and labels ourselves? Right? So that's kind of where you get hung up when you talk about finding solutions to these issues, because we want to remove judgment, right? And we want to be the change that we want to see. But a lot of times when we look at these problems, we say, oh, yeah, you know, this is the issue. And, you know, we have this huge problem with stigma and labels in our community. And, you know, it's because of those people over there, they're always doing this. And that program over there, they call people this and they do this to them. And then this program over here, they don't want to help people because they think they already know who they are. So they don't want to offer the help that they want. And in the process of doing that, like, are we judging all of those people, right? And this is one of the ones where I really wrestled with as I was making this change. So, like, this is something that I've actually implemented in my life, in my workplace. But it was a real struggle for me because what I had to do was become completely self-aware, and I had to remove judgment from my life. And that was so hard because, like I said, with the activity, what I realized is that I was constantly labeling people. And one of the things that I realized once I said, okay, you know what, I'm not going to judge anymore. What I realized is that I am judging all of the time, constantly. And in order to do that, I had to stop and I'd look at myself and I'd say, you know what, I can stop using these terms. I can stop labeling people. I can stop judging people. And a lot of that came from, like, the reason why I show those first few slides is because there is a root of the problem for every individual within our communities, right? Whatever their situation, whatever they're going through, there's a reason why it's like that. And I can sit here and say, yes, I've been through these certain things and I've made changes in my life, but that's my experience. That is my personal experience, and no one else shares that, right? People may have similar experiences, people may have made similar changes, but they haven't done it just the way that I have, and they haven't lived it just the way that I have. So when I look at individuals that are trying to make change, I always try to look at it and say, okay, this is your situation. I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to make that judgment to say, like, yes, you made all these mistakes in the past, and yes, you are this. I'm here to say, okay, this is where you're at right now. Where do you want to go? Let's help you get there, right? So, like, it's really hard to figure out how we stress that, but I think it just comes back to self-awareness and figuring out for yourself, you know, what level of judgment do you have within your life, you know, and how do you begin to remove that? And if you were to do that, what's the impact that it would have on yourself and those around you, you know? And it's really that simple because, again, if we go back to, like, what's the solution? A lot of times we want to look outward and say, well, they need to change this and they need to change that, and those people over there need to change this. But, like, now we're labeling them, right? and we're judging them on what they're doing. We have to worry about ourselves, and be that example. So I know it's kind of cliche to say be the change you want to be, but I think the older I get, I used to hear cliches and I'd be like, man, that's dumb. People are always saying that. But like the older I get and the more I grow and the more that I change within my own life, I just always think like, man, the reason why it's cliche and the reason why people always say it is because it's true, you know? So that's kind of one of the things that I've come to learn as I get older and grow a little bit more. But I think really when it comes to the solution of this, it really just starts with every individual. So, it starts with you, and it starts with me. And all I can do is make the changes that I can make within myself and then hope that, I'm the example and that people see that and they say, okay. I think at a system level, like the power of language is important, and like I said, you think about what are we calling individuals that are coming in to seek service? Are we calling them clients? I think I read one that said consumer. I know a lot of people call them recoveries or patients. What do we want to call individuals? And trying to figure out what is the terms that we use that are, I think, most beneficial to change and less stigmatizing to people, but we also want to create safe places where individuals feel free from judgment. So, those of you that have seen me speak before, I do a lot of work with peer support, and I built peer support program, and I've worked a lot with recovery coaches. And one of the things that I found in doing that is in the program that we built, one of the most important things that I ever heard, and I heard it often from people, was I really like coming here because I don't feel judged here, and it was because, we were constantly dealing with people that relapse, but it was never like, oh man, people come in like, man, I relapsed and I ruined everything. And it's like, no, you didn't. You didn't ruin anything. You know what? You've been coming here for 6 months. And just because you relapsed, does all of that knowledge and growth that you got within the last 6 months automatically go away? No. You made a mistake and it's in the past. Let's start from right now and let's move forward. I don't care that you relapsed. Yeah, it's kind of a bummer, but I don't care. Like, you're here now. That's what I care about, and taking that approach to things, people really took to that. And I was always surprised that when you treat people like that, they have that almost surprise thing of whoa, you're not going to judge me, or you don't think bad of me, and it's like, no, you're here right now. Let's figure out what we're going to do. How are we going to fix it? Always having that positive outlook and again, not being judgmental. But then once we got to that point, I always thought well, I wonder what they're getting from other programs or from other professionals that make them feel that they're being judged, So that's for everyone else to determine, that's not for me to determine. But again, through self-awareness, think about, are you putting that into your practice at all? But it also starts with work culture. So, how do we operate within our own setting and with between our own employees? And what type of culture have we created within our own workplace? Are we the type of workplace that engages in gossip and things like that? Are we judging one another within the workplace? So again, it comes back to that self. How can I improve myself to make my workplace better, to make then my community better and the people around me better? So, we can move on. And I keep forgetting to move the slides, you guys. I apologize. I'm moving them on my screen and not the next one. But, again, the takeaways to this is just we need to create awareness regarding stigmas and labels in our communities. That was one of the biggest things when we talk about well, how do we do that? And how do we do it without judging people? That's a big one. And one of the things that I found most effective for me is in the workplace, or if I'm just out in the community, or even if I'm with my family, right? And people start labeling people or judging people or talking bad or gossiping, a lot of times I'll just get up and I won't say anything. I'll just get up and leave. That's it. Because I'm like, you know what? I have other things to do and I'm not going to engage in this behavior. And I don't even have time to tell you why. I'm just going to leave. And later on, sometimes people will be like, oh, what happened? You were here and then you just headed out. I'm like, well, you guys started gossiping or you guys started talking bad about this person. I don't do that, you know? And that is like not saying you were doing this and it's bad. It's saying this is what was happening and that's a fact. And I don't do that. So I left. You know, and that's one of the most effective way that I found to like remove myself from the judgment. So I'm not saying like, oh, you guys are bad for doing that. Like you're not supposed to be doing that and you guys are bad people. Like, no, I'm just saying I hear it. This is what it is. And I'm not engaging in it. So I'm going to remove myself from that situation. And that's changing patterns of behavior, you know, that are rooted in historical trauma, difficult to change. So like that may seem like a small thing, but again, those things we grew up in all of that, and it just continues that cycle. So, you know, trying to change those things, they're very difficult, but they can be done. You know, large scale change requires several small steps, and the change begins with us. So I think that's probably the most important thing that I can share is just really that, you know, we have to become self-aware. And, you know, we're right up against the time, and I can't believe it went by that fast because it doesn't, like, again, it doesn't feel like we even scratched the surface of this. So, like, I had a really hard time putting this presentation together because I was like, I have like bigger things on this, and I had to figure out how do I do like an introduction to it and try to get into some of this stuff without, like, it was hard. So I thought the best thing that we could do is do the activity and just bring awareness to you guys that, you know, I think we can start to change things within ourselves and just being aware of if we're using those things or not. So I did have a slide for questions, which I don't think we have time for.
We can always do a part 2 sometime, if people are interested. Just a thought. You know, Jason is so busy, I hate to ask, but if you do want to continue this actual topic, we can definitely schedule something to do part 2. I know you struggle to do it in an hour, and I want to hear the rest of what you have to say. So think about it, and maybe we'll arrange something.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, just to intro you guys, so I think the activity is probably the most important thing because it kind of shows us, I think, all of the different things. And that was in like a 2-minute time span that we came up with all of those things. And then kind of processing how that made you feel. And then kind of projecting that onto, again, how does that make other people feel, you know? And what impact does that have on their ability to change and our ability to help people change if that's the profession that we're in. So, you know, kind of go out there and, you know, like I said, as you leave here today and as you go through your daily life, think about it like as you do that. And this is how I did it. I just kind of, for myself, was I started to realize, oh shoot, I did use that term, or I did start catching myself, or I am judging this person. And my wife and I did this together, so it's kind of cool to have a partner because we would like call each other on it and be like, "Hey, you just said that about that person. You're judging, you know? Oops, you know." So again, self-awareness. So that's all I have for you guys. I have a little slide up here. It's got my email and phone number. So if you want to get a hold of me or you want to talk about it further, you're welcome to. And maybe Megan can set up a kind of follow-up presentation. We can get a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I would really like to hear the rest of, like I said, what you have to say on this topic. And I know we can make it happen as long as your schedule is free to do so, Jason, because like I said, I understand how busy you are running around doing what you're doing every day. So I think we're all stretched a little thin these days, trying to keep up, Jim and I talked about that earlier. But we're getting back into the swing of life, I feel like a little bit more every day, trying to navigate this crazy world that we are existing in, but I thank you. I love your presentation colors, by the way. They're beautiful. And so thank you for putting this together, Jason. If anybody has any questions, I put my email in the chat earlier. Let me know. Otherwise, look for a follow-up email to come with this information in it, and we will set something up for the future as long as it works out with Jason. I thank you guys for attending, and it's good to see some familiar faces on here. So take care of yourselves and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.